The thing that's never been explained about Loughgall isn't how it happened. We know how it happened. 30 soldiers, 6 firing positions, 600 spent cartridge cases, 8 dead IRA men and 1 dead civilian. All of it over in a few minutes. What's never been explained is how the British Army knew. Because they did know. On 7th of May 1987, the day before the attack, British security forces received specific intelligence stating that Loughgall RUC station was the target and that the attack would come on 8th May. That fact isn't contested. It comes from the British government's own account, placed before the European Court of Human Rights in Kelly and others versus the United Kingdom, a case decided in 2001. The court's factual summary is explicit. Following a briefing that there was likely to be a terrorist attack on Loughgall station of the Royal Ulster Constabulary in County Armagh on 8th May 1987, a large number of soldiers were deployed in the area. 24 SAS soldiers took up 6 positions in the wooded grounds surrounding the station. Soldiers A through F wore plain clothes inside the building itself. The remaining 18 wore uniform, distributed across 5 locations in the trees south and north of the Loughgall Road. The station kept its normal schedule on the 8th May, opening at 9 a.m, closing at 11, reopening at 5 p.m, closing again at 7, giving no indication to anyone watching that anything had changed. 3 RUC officers were inside, the local constable and 2 officers from the Headquarters Mobile Support Unit, the RUC's tactical unit, placed alongside him that day. 6 SAS soldiers in plain clothes were with them. What drove into that village at roughly 7:15 p.m. was an 8-man IRA unit that believed its operation was secure. A blue Toyota Hiace van, stolen from a man named Core at a snooker club in Dungannon that afternoon. He was warned not to call the police for 4 hours. A hijacked digger carrying 300 to 400 pounds of explosive inside an oil drum in the bucket. The digger had come from a farm at Lislesley Road, about 2 miles west of Loughgall, where IRA men had arrived at 6 p.m, told the family they needed the machine, filled it with diesel, assembled the bomb in the yard. The unit drove past the station twice, slowly. They saw nothing alarming. Declan Arthurs drove the digger back through the perimeter fence, lit the fuse. Patrick Kelly jumped from the passenger seat of the van and opened fire on the building. The bomb detonated. Masonry and dust in all directions. The SAS opened fire from 6 positions simultaneously. M16 and H&K G3 rifles, 2 L7A2 general-purpose machine guns. 600 spent British cartridge cases were recovered from the scene. 78 had come from IRA weapons. All 8 IRA members were dead. Constables B and C were injured in the blast. Constable C with a fractured skull, damaged sinus, broken facial bone, a broken finger, a broken toe. Anthony Hughes was dead at the wheel of his white Citroën, shot behind the van on a road he had every right to use, wearing blue overalls that looked wrong at exactly the wrong moment. His brother Oliver was hit 14 times and survived. Weapons recovered: 3 H&K G3 rifles, 1 FN FAL, 2 FN FNC rifles, a Franke shotgun, a Ruger revolver. The Ruger had been taken from a reserve RUC officer killed in the 1985 Ballygawley attack. Declassified Irish government documents released in 2017 showed those weapons had been used in 40 to 50 killings. Every IRA fatality in Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987 before that night. The settled history ends there. The question it doesn't answer is how more than 30 soldiers came to be in position around a small rural police station, overnight, before 8 experienced IRA operatives arrived expecting to find it largely undefended. The figure most firmly established in the released record is approximately 24 hours. On 7th May, British forces received specific intelligence naming Loughgall and fixing the date as 8th May. That's 1 day's notice, which is remarkable on its own terms. Enough time to reposition 24 soldiers, brief them, establish 6 concealed firing positions across unfamiliar countryside, and hold them through the night. The logistics of that deployment don't happen from a standing start on a vague general threat. Someone, somewhere, gave someone something specific enough to make it happen. Campaigners for the victims' families, principally the Pat Finucane Centre, have pointed to an earlier RUC intelligence document, reportedly produced in late April 1987, that described the general outline of a planned attack on a police station using a digger and a bomb. If that document is accurately characterised, the warning window predates the confirmed 7th May briefing by approximately 9 days. The document hasn't been officially released or independently authenticated. The around 10 days figure that appears in secondary accounts derives from calculating the interval between a late April RUC memo, as described by campaign sources, and the 8th May attack. It's a derived figure rather than an official admission. The channel's own original Loughgall video raises it. It should be understood as a plausible but not officially confirmed claim. What is officially confirmed is the 7th May briefing. 1 day, specific target, specific date. That's the flaw, and the flaw is already extraordinary. The East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional IRA was, in the language of Forces News, disciplined, compartmentalised and ruthless. History Ireland calls it one of the most active and successful IRA brigades of the Troubles. Those assessments aren't retrospective gloss. They're grounded in a specific operational record that runs through the mid-1980s and doesn't obscure its own failures. Patrick Joseph Kelly became the brigade's commander in 1985 and immediately began a campaign targeting isolated rural security force installations. His theory? Destroy the bases, prevent their reconstruction, deny ground to the British. On 7th December 1985, at Ballygawley RUC barracks, the brigade sent 2 active service units, an armed assault unit and a bomb team, plus multiple observer teams, all under Kelly's direct command. 2 police officers were shot dead. In August 1986, not 1987, as it's often misdated in secondary sources, the brigade attacked the RUC and UDR base at the Birches near Portadown, using a digger to breach the perimeter fence and deliver a bomb. The same technique, the same structural logic. In the 6 months before 8th May 1987, the brigade carried out 22 attacks and killed 7 members of the security forces. Jim Liner, who died at Loughgall alongside Kelly, had been developing something more ambitious. He and Padraig McKerney were advocating what they called flying column tactics. Larger, mobile units launching sustained operations against fixed British installations, modelled deliberately on the 1919-21 IRA campaign. The Guardian reported in 2002 that Liner and others had grown increasingly disillusioned with the Republican leadership in the years before Loughgall. Within republicanism, Liner was a figure of real tactical significance. Loughgall cut short a strategy, not just a unit. The brigade's compartmentalisation was structural, not accidental. Operations used active service units, small segmented cells with planning functions kept separate from execution. A McGill magazine account describes the support network for an operation at Loughgall's scale as potentially involving between 50 and 100 people in various backup and observer roles, while the attacking core stayed tight and isolated from the wider structure. The men who drove to Loughgall on 8th May knew their task. The people who knew the full planning picture, the target, the method, the date, were a much smaller group. Former hunger striker Tommy McKerney has said that by the mid-1980s, the British government's intelligence agencies had heavily penetrated the IRA. That's not a contested claim. It's a concession from inside republicanism itself. But penetrating the IRA as a whole is different from penetrating a specific, tightly compartmentalized unit planning a specific attack. The brigade wasn't the Belfast networks, which had been riddled with informers since the early 1970s. Its run of successful operations through the mid-1980s suggested its security was holding. Loughgall didn't fit that pattern, and the brigade knew it. Two explanations for how the British knew have circulated since May 1987. Neither has been confirmed by a single official document released in any jurisdiction in nearly 4 decades. The first is technical surveillance. British intelligence's signals infrastructure in Northern Ireland in 1987 was layered and extensive. An academic analysis published through the European Intelligence and Counter-Terrorism Programme places GCHQ eavesdropping stations directly within County Armagh, the operational geography of the East Tyrone Brigade. GCHQ's interception capabilities in this period covered analogue landline telephone calls, VHF and UHF radio traffic, and audio from covert devices planted in buildings or vehicles. The 14 Intelligence Company, the DET, had been running covert surveillance against East Tyrone targets since at least the late 1970s. The ECHR factual record itself confirms that undercover 14 Intelligence Company soldiers were on the back roads into Loughgall on the night of the attack, circling the area as the IRA unit moved through the countryside. The surveillance-only argument works like this. If a conversation explicitly naming Loughgall, specifying the digger and bomb method, fixing a date, was captured by intercept or audio device, the intelligence picture the British had on 7th of May could have been generated without a human source at all. A McGill account references a person identified as a British agent at whose house a phone call was allegedly made on the morning of the attack. History Ireland cites a different version. A monitored call in which an IRA volunteer told his girlfriend about the plan. These two accounts can't both be fully accurate. They attribute the intelligence break to different people through different mechanisms. Neither has been confirmed by any official source. A third version comes from a 2017 account attributed to a former British Army intelligence officer, reportedly claiming there was no informer, and the plot was uncovered when the Army observed a known IRA operative casing construction sites in search of a digger to steal. Connecting that physical observation to Loughgall specifically, identifying the operative, inferring his purpose from his prior record, translating that inference into a briefing specific enough to mobilise 24 soldiers, would require a chain of deduction the public record doesn't document. The surveillance-only explanation isn't impossible, but the precision of what the British had on 7th May 1987 strains it. Not a general warning of an attack somewhere against something. Not a possible plan for a digger operation against an unspecified target. Loughgall specifically. The method specifically. The 8th specifically. That degree of specificity is consistent with technical intelligence, but only if the right conversation was captured at exactly the right moment with exactly the right content. It's also consistent, many analysts would say more naturally consistent, with a human source who had direct planning knowledge. Historian Richard English, former professor of politics at Queen's University Belfast, is cited in published accounts of the ambush as having stated the intelligence didn't come from within the attacking unit, meaning not from a mole inside the specific 8-man ASU. That finding, if accurate, points away from an internal traitor, but remains consistent with either a technical intercept or a human source outside the specific team who knew about the operation. No release document attributes the warning to technical surveillance. No release document confirms a human source. No British minister, no inquiry, no inquest evidence has ever specified the mechanism. The ECHR record confirms the briefing happened on 7th of May. It doesn't say where it came from. To understand why a human source is more than theoretically plausible requires understanding the intelligence infrastructure Britain was actively running in Northern Ireland in exactly this period. The supergrass system of the early 1980s is the most visible window into British thinking about human sources at this time. Christopher Black's 1983 Belfast trial produced 38 convictions on his testimony alone, the largest mass conviction from a single informer's evidence in Northern Ireland's history. The trial judge was later criticised for assessing Black's credibility too favourably. Convictions were appealed and most fell. Raymond Gilmore, whose evidence was central to a Derry Republican trial, was characterised as an unreliable witness by Lord Chief Justice Lord Lowry, collapsing the case entirely. At its height, approximately 25 supergrasses were active simultaneously across Northern Ireland. The supergrass system largely failed in court. But it reveals what the British state was willing to do. It exposed its human intelligence apparatus in open proceedings, absorbed the political fallout of mass acquittals, and offered protection, relocation, and payment to sources at considerable institutional cost. When the courts closed off that avenue, intelligence operations didn't stop. They moved further from public view. The model shifted from prosecution to disruption, and in some cases to lethal force. By 1987, human intelligence flowed through two competing channels. RUC Special Branch held official primacy over intelligence matters from 1976. The Force Research Unit, the FRU, was the British Army's separate agent-running body, operating from Lisburn in deliberate tension with Special Branch. Gordon Kerr commanded the FRU from 1987 to 1991. Former FRU officer Martin Ingram, writing under a pseudonym in the 2004 book Steak Knife, Britain's Secret Agents in Ireland, described the unit's geographic coverage as explicitly including North Armagh, East Tyrone and Fermanagh, the precise territory of the East Tyrone Brigade. The FRU's mission, as later documentation characterised it, was to obtain intelligence from secretly penetrating terrorist organisations by recruiting and running agents. The intelligence literature of this period suggests an estimated 1 in 30 to 40 IRA frontline members was providing information to British intelligence in some form between 1976 and 1987. That figure is derived from a range of sources and can't be verified from released documents. What is documented is the infrastructure, the tradecraft, and the institutional willingness to use human sources at considerable moral and political cost. Then there's what Operation Canova found. The investigation, established in 2016 and publishing its final report in December 2025, produced the most thorough examination of British agent running in Northern Ireland to reach public record. Its subject was the agent codenamed Steak Knife. That agent, Freddie Scappaticci, was confirmed as having headed the IRA's internal security unit, its nutting squad, while simultaneously acting as an army agent run primarily by the Force Research Unit. Former British Army General Sir John Willsey called him the Golden Egg. The Guardian reported in 2003 that Steak Knife had been paid £80,000 a year by the government. Canova's final report confirmed Scappaticci had told his wife and a female associate he was steak knife. It also found that MI5 had, quote, concealed what it knew about Scappaticci's activities from the investigators examining his case. Canova's interim report, published March 2024, rejected claims that steak knife saved hundreds of lives. Intelligence attributable to him saved, at most, low double figures of identifiable lives. The report concluded it was probable that more lives were lost than saved through his continued operation as an agent. None of this connects Scappaticci specifically to Loughgall. No released document does. But his case establishes the structural reality of 1987. The British had agents operating at the most sensitive levels of IRA security, across exactly the geography relevant to the East Tyrone Brigade, protected with an institutional commitment that extended to active concealment from the people who would later seek accountability. Whether any FRU-handled agent knew about Loughgall before 8 May 1987 isn't established in any available document. What is established is that the capability existed, the coverage extended to the right geography, and the state had demonstrated it would go to considerable lengths to protect what it ran. Several names have circulated publicly over the years as the possible source of the Loughgall intelligence. Every one is an unproven allegation. This channel's earlier video, the one examining whether Gerry Adams was the SAS informer who set up the ambush, covered the most prominent theory in detail, and it's now part of the public record that the question has been asked. The basis of that allegation is a memo dated 12 May 1987, 4 days after the ambush, which journalist Ed Maloney associated with the suggestion that Adams had advanced knowledge of the attack. Adams has consistently denied being a member of the IRA. What Maloney wrote in December 2017 on his blog, The Broken Elbow, is more instructive than the allegation itself. He acknowledged there were equally credible explanations, including mistakes made by the IRA team, as well as routine British surveillance or the activities of informers unconnected to the Republican leadership. The journalist most associated with the Adams allegation publicly said it wasn't the only, or necessarily the most credible, explanation. The McGill account identifies someone it calls a British agent at whose house a phone call was allegedly made on the morning of the attack. That identification has appeared in print and hasn't been independently confirmed. It sits alongside the competing History Ireland account, suggesting an IRA volunteer inadvertently revealed the plan to his girlfriend in a personal call. No cultivated asset involved in that version, just a conversation in the wrong place. These two phone-related explanations attribute the intelligence break to different people through different mechanisms and can't both be accurate. An account published by the Irish Observer describes what it calls a Monaghan-based informer who contacted his handler to report that Jim Liner had moved to a safe house in Coal Island, County Tyrone, in the days before the attack. In this version, the source wasn't inside the attacking unit at all. He had knowledge of personnel movements rather than the full operational plan. That's consistent with Richard English's suggestion that the intelligence didn't originate from within the 8-man ASU, but the account comes from a single source and hasn't been corroborated. Each of these accounts describes a different mechanism, a different alleged source, and a different origin for the intelligence. They can't all be accurate. Some may be completely wrong. The history of what happens when wrong names attach in this territory isn't theoretical. The IRA's internal security unit killed people suspected of being informers during the Troubles, sometimes on inadequate evidence, sometimes on confessions extracted under duress. An accusation that attaches to a name has proved repeatedly difficult to dislodge, even when unfounded. No available evidence establishes any named individual as the Loughgall source. That isn't false modesty about a known answer. It's the actual state of the record. What is documented is that the IRA believed there was a source. Its official statement after the ambush said volunteers who escaped saw other volunteers being shot on the ground after being captured, a claim contested by the security forces, but revealing about the movement's immediate need to explain what had happened. An ambush this precise doesn't arise from bad luck. The brigade's first response was to look for the explanation inside itself. Sinn Féin's weekly newspaper An Phoblacht, in its edition of 14th May 1987, the first full public Republican response to the ambush, was notable for what it didn't say. The Irish Department of the Taoiseach's own analysis of that edition, now in the National Archives of Ireland, records that An Phoblacht didn't address the question of whether or how the security forces knew in advance of the attack, and made no reference to the possibility of an IRA informer. The public voice of the Republican movement, 1 week after 8 of its most capable members were killed in an ambush that couldn't have happened without advance intelligence, stayed silent on the question of how the British knew. Internally, the question was anything but silent. After 8th May 1987, the East Tyrone Brigade began looking. The IRA's internal security unit, known as the Nutting Squad because of its practice of shooting suspected informers in the back of the head, was activated. 8 men were dead. The mission had been known to a limited circle. The brigade's meticulous compartmentalization meant the failure had to be traced back through a small number of people who had known specific details: the target, the timing, the method. Death in the Fields, a study of the IRA in East Tyrone, records that an internal inquiry involved about a couple of dozen suspects we'd been told to investigate. That's a systematic sweep, not a fringe response. Every person who might have known anything specific. The unit running that investigation was headed by Freddie Scappaticci. By 1987, Scappaticci had been a British Army agent for years, rising to control the very body tasked with finding British agents. As Martin Ingram later put it, the IRA leadership had made the fatal mistake of assuming that someone who killed on behalf of the Provisional IRA couldn't possibly be used as an informer. Scappaticci had killed on behalf of the IRA. He directed the killings of suspected informers. He was also, Canova confirmed, the most significant British agent inside the organisation. BBC reporting in 2023 noted that by the 1980s he was operating at the heart of the IRA, within its internal security unit, killing suspected traitors while remaining one himself. The structural consequence for any post-Loughgall investigation is stark. Any inquiry passing through internal security channels was potentially visible to British intelligence because the man running those channels was a British agent. The hunt for the Loughgall source was operating in conditions that couldn't guarantee integrity, not because the source was particularly clever, but because the institution hunting for him had been penetrated at its centre. Whether British handlers actively shaped the investigation's conclusions, or whether Scappaticci's position simply meant its findings weren't fully secure, is another question the released record doesn't answer. What emerged wasn't resolution. It was a generalised paranoia that the specific investigation couldn't resolve. Counterinsurgency analysis of this period identifies Loughgall as having induced demoralisation and hunts for informers, a double wound. The brigade had lost 8 men in minutes and couldn't establish why, or who had made it possible. That uncertainty had operational weight. It changed how the organisation thought about itself and its own security. The brigade kept operating. On the 20th of August 1988, 15 months after Loughgall, East Tyrone carried out the Ballygawley bus bombing, a roadside bomb that killed 8 British soldiers and injured 28 others. An academic article in the journal State Crime noted that the brigade's kill total of 13 security force personnel in 1988 was indubitably in direct retaliation for security force success at Loughgall the previous year. The brigade hadn't been broken, but the question of how the 8th of May had happened didn't close with that demonstration of continued capacity. It accumulated. In December 2011, the PSNI's Historical Inquiries team completed its review of the Loughgall case and provided a report to the families. The HET concluded the IRA unit fired first and the SAS response was legally justified. Sinn Féin denounced the report. A 2013 HMIC inspection subsequently found the HET had applied a different standard of rigour to cases involving military personnel than to non-state cases, a systemic problem that touched its work across many reviews. The intelligence origin question, so far as the released HET findings reveal, wasn't reached. The families pursued the matter through civil litigation. An inquest ordered in September 2015 hadn't proceeded to a full hearing as of April 2020, when the family's lawyers wrote to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe to say no hearing date had been fixed. The inquest, when it sits, will be the most thorough public examination of the 9 deaths ever conducted. What it can't compel, not without overcoming a public interest immunity claim, is the identity of the intelligence source. Operation Canova's final report, published December 2025, criticised the British state's continued refusal to confirm Stakeknife's identity even after Scappaticci's death in March 2023, saying it had a severe impact on victims and families, legitimate public debate, media freedom, open justice, and public confidence in state authorities. If the British state won't name a dead man whose identity was reported by 5 newspapers in May 2003, whose family was told by Operation Canova that the claims were almost universally treated as true, who died having changed his name to Frank Cowley and relocated multiple times under threat, if that level of documented certainty isn't sufficient, there's no realistic expectation it will name a Loughgall source whose identification would reopen inquests, end careers, and expose decades of intelligence operations to public legal scrutiny. The soldiers who fired at Loughgall appear in the ECHR record, the inquest record, and every official account as Soldier A through Soldier X. Standard practice for Special Forces personnel. Not unusual by itself. What is unusual is that the same functional anonymity, reinforced not by convention but by active legal suppression, extends to the intelligence that made the ambush possible. The HET didn't reach it. The inquest hasn't reached it. No inquiry has reached it. It sits behind public interest immunity that hasn't been successfully challenged in nearly 40 years. Mark Urban's Big Boys Rules, published in 1992 and still one of the most thorough accounts of SAS operations in this period, contains a line that describes the broader problem exactly. That failure results almost entirely from the desire to protect intelligence sources. Urban was writing about a different failure in a different context, but the principle applies here with precision. The British state has consistently chosen to protect the source over answering the question, and the 40-year silence is the answer it has chosen to give. 8 men drove to Loughgall on the 8th of May 1987, believing they were about to destroy a police station the way they'd destroyed others. They drove past it twice, slowly. The digger went first, then turned. The van followed, watching. One account records that the unit debated whether to continue. Something didn't look right. But Patrick Kelly gave the order, and they went ahead. They had no idea that 24 soldiers had been in position since the early hours of that morning. They didn't know that the station's normal appearance concealed 6 SAS men in plain clothes behind its windows, or that 18 more were lying in the trees around them in the dark. They didn't know that their plan had been known to the people waiting for them, in outline at least, and in specific operational detail by the day before. They drove into it, believing their security had held. The honest answer, arrived at from the released record, the legal proceedings, the published journalism, and the academic literature, is that we don't know exactly how the British knew. Surveillance is possible. A human source is possible. A combination of both is possible. The surveillance-only account is strained by the precision of what the British had on 7th May, the specific target, the specific method, the specific date, but it can't be ruled out. Asserting a human source without documentary confirmation would misrepresent what the record actually shows. Ed Maloney's A Secret History of the IRA, published in 2002 and described by one reviewer as potentially the standard, if not the definitive work on the history of the provisional IRA, acknowledged multiple credible explanations and declined to point cleanly to any one. Mark Urban didn't name a source either. No inquest has produced one. Nothing from Operation Canova's December 2025 final report, which examined criminal offences by IRA members, Army personnel, intelligence handlers, and others across the entire steak knife investigation, addresses the Loughgall intelligence origin. What can be said is that the British state has had nearly 40 years to explain how its forces knew. It hasn't. The disclosures that have come, a specific operational briefing on 7th May, confirm the fact of advanced knowledge without explaining its origin. The East Tyrone Brigade never quite trusted itself in the same way again. Its internal investigation produced suspects and no verdicts. The man running that investigation was himself what it was looking for. Anthony Hughes's family waited 27 years for an apology from the Ministry of Defence, a statement that he and his brother Oliver were wholly innocent of any wrongdoing. That's how long the state took to acknowledge what was never in genuine dispute about a man who had simply been driving home. The men who fired at Loughgall that night have never been publicly named. Neither, after nearly 40 years, has the person who told them where to be. The most dangerous question in the whole story is the one the British state has answered by saying nothing at all. Not how. Who? Subscribe for more stories like this.